When Final Destination hit theaters in 2000, it delivered the fresh twist that the horror genre desperately needed by asking one simple question. What if death itself was the villain? No masked killer, no possessed house, no monster, just the inevitability of fate. Its Rube Goldberg style death scenes, philosophical undertones set it apart, earning it a cult following in a multi film franchise. 25 years have passed since that first entry, and Final Destination Bloodlines is right around the corner, which means it is the perfect time to ask the all important question: does it hold up? In terms of atmosphere and originality, Final Destination, it hit. Its premise: teenagers cheating death only to be hunted down by death itself. The characters felt genuine. They felt like early 2000s young adults, complete with clunky dialogue and fashion choices of the time. But while some effects feel dated and the pacing is stop and start, we have to ask, does the psychological horror and inventiveness still hold up 25 years later? Or is this just another horror flick? So the hook is beautiful in its simplicity. What if death had a plan? And by getting in its way, death is now coming after you. See, by the year 2000, horror was in a bit of an identity crisis. For about 30 ish years up into that point, slashers had dominated the genre. And frankly, a lot of those inventions and reinventions and reinventions and reinventions all came from a small handful of voices, most of them coming from one single guy, Wes Craven, the GOAT. Still to this day, my favorite director. But by the time 2000 rolled around, we were in a post Scream landscape. Slashers, still dominating the market, had devolved into teen casts that each one kind of filled an archetype within the high school paradigm. And it was all very much a Scooby Doo style adventure where you were waiting to see which one of the friend group was going to get offed and who was doing it. And this is where Final Destination comes in with a unique concept: death as the villain. Instead of some crazed madman wearing a mask, instead of some demonic force or some alien from beyond the stars, what if it was a force of nature, death itself, and you couldn't do anything to stop it? See, this premise was not originally meant as a movie. It was originally pitched as an episode of The X-Files. See, thankfully for us, a couple of friends of the writer stepped in and suggested that he turn it into a full-length feature and pitch that. And he did. And New Line bought it, got a rewrite, and that's how we got Final Destination. And with that unique premise of death as a villain, it took the worlds of paranormal and slasher, combined them together, and suddenly you get a new subgenre: psychological inevitability horror, which was a huge thing, which really capitalized on the time. See, the early 2000s were rife for existential dread. Y2K paranoia had just passed. We all collectively survived the turning of the new millennium, but everybody was on edge. Nobody really knew what to expect next, especially because we were looking at the moral landscape and asking big questions, because just a year prior, you had Columbine, which changed the face of teen violence forever. And so people were asking big questions, let alone 10, 20 years had already gone by of people asking questions of morality and ethics in the form of moral majority, in the form of satanic panic, and especially by this point, asking questions of culture and asking, should violence be in movies? Should violence be in TV shows, video games? Was metal music decaying the youth? All because we were living in a time of extreme and looking at this as if we were on the precipice of the decay of culture in a post-Christian world. And so all of those fears, all of that dread, all of that paranoia was all encapsulated in this feeling of these teens should have the rest of their life in front of them, but they just simply don't. And so it took that air, that feeling of the time, and wrapped it up in a bow of kills that, quite honestly, felt possible. A plane explosion, a bathroom slip, a bus out of nowhere. It felt like bad luck, not black magic. Now, see, you have those big existential fears coupled with very practical and human ones. What is fate? What is inevitability? Should I be getting on an airplane? Now, I understand that that question has an entirely different tone to it, even a year after this movie coming out. Like, let's be honest, this movie doesn't come out a year later. But it's not like that fear of flying was born in 2001. People had concerns about flying for a long time, just like people were asking big questions for a long time. So, all of that being said, we ask the big question, how's it feel in 2025? Well, Mrs. Bearded Geek and I watched this in preparation for this video and anticipation for Bloodlines coming out. And I took a couple of notes. The setup is still genius. The tone all feels like there's dread in the air. There's dread in the air. You can feel the anxiety as everything is building. It feels like a series of weird coincidences. It feels like, oh, this could just be some normal concerns, some normal jitters up until that scene. And this is before this series gave an entire generation trauma and driving behind a log truck. The way that they shoot the nightmare premonition scene heading into the actual inciting event was chilling. The way they stuck on certain scenes and didn't cut away. Sure, the CGI is still CGI from the 2000s. It is what it is. But it made you sit in the moment of some folks' big fears being realized and actually being depicted and brought to life. It was quite literally watching the wreck and not being able to turn away from it. And then we're off to the races. Now, yes, the cast is not reinventing the wheel. We still have supposed to be teenage characters that each one kind of exemplifies a trope from high school life. But they're put in situations where they aren't given the agency to outsmart what is happening or to overcome the force that's against them. They think they do, but ultimately they don't. And we're presented with a series of death setups that range in complexity. Some of them are ridiculous in their scale, but some of them are sudden. Some of them are just out of nowhere. And I think that blend between the two styles really lends to the overall pacing of the series. And I think that combination really lends to the pacing of the movie because there's situations where you should be looking at it like, okay, so it's this thing, or is it this thing, or is it this thing? But instead you're like sitting on the edge of your seat because you're watching, oh, this piece is here and this piece is here, and each part of the scene matters. And watching this first one, I can see how this spun off an entire franchise, including books and comics, for those of you that don't know, because this is an interesting concept. And it hints at, especially with Clear, also having premonitions like this is something bigger than just Alex. This is something bigger than just this group of people. And we would see that some of them are connected to the original premise, other ones just kind of hint at Easter eggs and things like that. If I had a theory and a prediction for Bloodlines, and we'll see shortly how well this holds up, but I would guess that Bloodlines is going to take some of the concepts of the books and connect everything together, connect each one of our protagonists from the different movies all together. But I think it does a very good job of setting up a premise and making you feel like this is in a world where things outside of just what's being shot by the camera are happening. This is a lived in world. Yeah, the CGI is early 2000s, like I said. And the dialogue, it feels stiff, but I don't actually hate that because it's coming from teenagers. It's coming from people that aren't these well-groomed, well-presented, almost unrealistic teenagers. They're set as actually real people, which would mean that the dialogue would feel weird. And yes, the pacing can lag in comparison to today's adrenaline-filled horror, but the tension still works. Yeah, the vibe is nostalgic, but not in a cheesy way. It's a time capsule and holds up, especially if you've never seen any of the movies before. So Final Destination would go on to spawn 4 sequels and a dedicated fan base. It would get panned by critics. And that would basically be the legacy of the franchise as a whole, where they would come out, they would get panned by critics, but the fan base would keep the franchise going until not even the fans could keep that franchise going. But it left on a note and then stayed quiet outside of the books. And so now would be the time to bring it back, especially in today's world of requels and legacy sequels. Each film would up the ante with more elaborate deaths and bigger spectacles, but it all started with this little scream into the void about fate. It started very practical. Its influence lives on. You can see the echoes of it in Saw, in The Invisible Man, in Black Mirror. And let's be honest, the memes are iconic. If you've ever backed away from a truck carrying logs on the highway, you know why. So, does the original Final Destination still hold up? Yes. I think Devon Sawa does an amazing job carrying the movie. I think the cast largely does fine. It was weird to see Sean William Scott play largely a nerd, especially since he already played Stifler by this point. But largely, I think the cast does a pretty decent job of portraying the roles that they are supposed to play. And then, not to mention, we get one of the goats, Tony Todd, as the mortician that at the time everybody thought that that was actually death. That we were so used to the killer being an actual flesh and blood person that death took human form, and that was what we were getting with Tony Todd. We would find out that his name is William Bloodworth, and we would get a backstory for him, a bit of a story for him, and he would become more of an established person, like actual physical person. But at this point, we had no idea. And not that long ago, he was playing horror icons himself.
Be my victim.
And everything that happened after the fact, I thought was clever. Looking at everything from a point of view that death has an actual design and giving it an actual structure, I thought was well done. The ending is a little clunky. I think it shows that they needed to do something with it, and the original ending was much worse than the ending that we got. It In the original, Alex and Claire end up having a kid, and Alex doesn't make it out of the original, but both of those things were panned by audiences during test screenings, so we got what we got. You can definitely tell that they were scrambling with for ideas on how to fully stick the landing, but all in all, I think it's creative, I think it's intense, and I think it asks big questions in a way that kind of makes it unforgettable, even if the edges are a bit worn. But I want to know what you think. Did Final Destination mess you up back in the day? Have you seen it? Are you going to go and watch Bloodlines? Which death scene stuck with you the most? Drop your thoughts down in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, subscribe, do all those YouTube things so that way you don't miss any more Does It Hold Up deep dives. And remember, you can't cheat death. Stay spooky. Peace, geeks.